Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Joaqin, and you're watching MTG Crash Course. Today I got a commander deck tech for you on my personal commander deck, and that is Vorel of the Whole Clade. So, Vorel is a 1/4 for 1 colorless, 1 green, and 1 blue. He has the ability to pay 1 blue and 1 green to tap him for each counter on target creature, land, or artifact. Put another type of those counters on it. So let's say Vorel had 2 +1/+1 counters on him. You would double that, and it would become 4 +1/+1 counters. And then 4 would become 8, and so on. So with him as commander, he has a lot of advantages. Main thing is that he only costs 3 mana, and his ability that's super relevant in this deck only costs 2 mana. You do have to tap him, but what we're playing in this deck is a bunch of different ways to take advantage of the counters that we have on cards. So let's start with the mana base. And we have pretty simple, for basics we have 14 forests. I just have regular forests here. To go along with that, we play 12 basic islands. And for the rest of our lands, we play a few different non-basic lands. First one is Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, Simic Guildgate, which is especially relevant because it actually has a picture of Vorel on that gate there, which I think is pretty cool. After that, we have a Thornwood Falls, a Simic Growth Chamber. This is the type of land that you return a land to your hand when it comes into play. It enters tapped, but then it taps for a blue and a green, so it's great for filtering effects. On the more expensive side of it, we have Hinterland Harbor. Well, not super expensive, just about $5. But it does come into play untapped if you control an island or a forest, which in a deck like this we have so many basics, that happens all the time. Our lands that produce colorless mana is this. This is Rogue's Passage. It has the ability to pay 4, tap it, and you can make one of your creatures unblockable until end of turn. So you'll see that in this deck, when we make really giant creatures, we can make them unblockable and swing for the win. Another one is Novagen, Heart of Progress. I haven't used his ability very often, but you can pay a blue and a green, tap it, and put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that came into play this turn. So it can be pretty relevant. And then finally we have a Reliquary Tower. You'll see in this deck that we are able to draw a lot of cards. I don't like discarding at the end of my turn, so that's why I have this Reliquary Tower. So to start off, let's start with a few things that every basic blue-green commander deck should have. And I'll just go through those things right here. We have 1 Echoing Truth. This is super relevant in Commander because some players play token strategies, and you can bounce all of them. Curse of the Swine is one of my favorite budget cards. It's blue X. You can pay X mana, exile X target creatures, and the people who got their creatures exiled will get a 2/2 boar creature token. But it's more important that you exile whatever thing that they're doing. I have a Simic Charm for about the opposite reason. You can use it to give your creatures, give all of your permanents hexproof until end of turn, which is very relevant. We have an Eternal Witness. The signature by Therese Nielsen is optional, but it should go in every commander deck that has blue. It's about a $5 card, and that's because it's played in so many different formats and it's just so good. Returning any card from your hand when it comes into play, and it has a body with 2 power is very important. Cyclonic Rift. Blue and green does not have very many good board wipes, so this is your best option for a board wipe. But when you do get to cast it, it can be game-winning just on its own. And then finally, we have 1 Murkfiend Liege. Murkfiend Liege is, well, when Prophet of Kruphix was banned, a lot of people turned to this as a budget option, as opposed to Seedborn Muse. This won't untap your lands, but it will untap all of your blue or green creatures during each of your opponent's turns. So in a deck like Vorel, where his ability needs to be, you need to tap him in order to use his ability, you can do it multiple times if you have open mana and you have this out. So those are the cards that go in basically any blue-green deck. So the win conditions of the deck are to put a bunch of counters on a creature, make it unblockable and swing, and you can also do some pretty cool things with the counters that you place on these creatures. So one of the things that we can do is use this card, Bioshift. And you probably can't see it, but Bioshift is a 1 mana, well, 1 blue-green hybrid mana, and what you do is you can move any number of +1/+1 counters from one creature onto another creature. So that'll come in handy in just a little bit. So let's see. Let's start out with our decent ramp package. So first we have a Gyre Sage. This is one of the cards that Vorel really loves to make the counters on, because you add a green mana for each +1/+1 counter that is on Gyre Sage, and that can get help you ramp a lot. Along with that, we have Fertilid. This is a card that comes into play with 2 +1/+1 counters. You can pay a blue and a green and remove a +1/+1 counter from him to basically cast a Rampant Growth. So it gets a land out of your deck and puts it into play tapped. So if you get a lot of counters on here and you have a lot of open mana, then you can just double the counters and go crazy and just get all the lands out of your deck. We have one Sakura Tribelder, which is also something that should go in every green deck. And then along those same lines, we have Kodama's Reach and Explosive Vegetation. So some of the other things is, this is a mid-range combo-y type of commander deck, so you want to be able to be as defensive as possible in the early game, and then late game try to win with card advantage. So we have about 7 counter spells. Power Sink, a really underrated counter spell. It's basically 1 blue and X, counter target spell unless its controller pays X. So in a deck like this where you can make a lot of mana, it can just counter a spell by itself. Of course, we have to run Classic Counterspell. This is my favorite art from 6th edition. In Commander, it's fun to play Redirect because it's only 2 blue mana, and you can use it to redirect somebody's fireball they're trying to kill you with, and it works really well. Insidious Will is a new card. It also has a slight, it's able to be diverse in what it can do. But if you just need to counter something, you can counter something. If you need it to copy a spell, you can do that. If you need to change the targets for it, then you can also do that. So, very cheap card, I recommend playing this. Fuel for the Cause is especially good in this deck because it counters a spell, and then you proliferate. So proliferate is a mechanic that came out in Mirrodin block, or one of those revised Mirrodin blocks, and you get to choose any number of counters that you have on any of your permanents, and you get to put another counter on there. So for example, if I had 3 counters on Vorel and 2 counters on another creature, I could put 1 more counter on Vorel and 1 more counter on the other creature to make it go up to 4 counters and 3 counters. And that works with charge counters. It can work with counters that are on planeswalkers, which I don't have in this deck, but I mostly have artifacts. So the last few counter spells is Plasm Capture. This is a 4 mana mana drain, so you counter a spell, and then during your next turn, you get mana equal to the converted mana cost of the spell that you countered. And then finally, you don't have to run this, but I happen to own one of these, so this is a Force of Will, best counter spell in Magic. Again, the Therese Nielsen signature is optional, but this is actually my friend's card. I borrowed it from him, and I got it signed for him as a surprise, and he's letting me borrow it for a little bit longer. So that's always good to have. You could play any other counter spell that's costs less, in my opinion, and it'll do about the same job. So in order to use Vorel's ability the best, we have Illusionist Bracers. This is an equipment that we put onto Vorel, and it says that it will make it so that whenever we use Vorel's ability, that ability will be copied, and we get a second copy of the ability. So we can double the counters on something, and then this will trigger, and we'll double the counters on it again, so it can get really out of hand really quick. Another thing that can accelerate that is Hardened Scales. This is a card that's getting a lot of attention these days. It's not as good as Doubling Season, but it is 1 mana, and it says that whenever a +1/+1 counter is placed on a creature we control, we add that many counters +1. So that works really well in combination with this card, the artifact Power Conduit. We can tap it, remove any type of counter from anything we have, and put a +1/+1 counter on something, or put a charge counter on something. And this deck, where we have charge counters and +1/+1 counters, and combined with Hardened Scales, it can get pretty broken pretty fast for very little mana. Now the other artifacts that we have in the deck are, well, here's a few things that are just, well, here's one thing that's just a standard. You want to run a Swiftfoot Boots. This gives Vorel haste and shroud. Very, very good. Or haste and hexproof in this case. So people will try to target Vorel after he starts doing broken things. So our artifacts that we can double counters on is Triskelion. This comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. We can remove a counter and either deal 1 damage to target creature or to target player. So what we can do is get 40 +1/+1 counters on him by using Vorel, and then shoot our opponent for 40 and win the game. And that's one of the win conditions that we have. Along those same lines is Mindless Automaton. He comes into play with 2 counters. We can remove 2 counters to draw a card. So once he's into play, we can double the counters, and then just draw a bunch of cards. Now these are 4 artifacts that are really important. First one is Contagion Engine. When it comes into play, you get to put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls, which can be relevant, but what's really important is its bottom ability. We pay 4 mana, we tap it, and we get to proliferate, and then proliferate again is the keyword. So we proliferate twice with this, and it can be very, very effective when you have lots of things on the board. These last 3 things are all counters, are all artifacts that have counters on them that we want to get as many as possible. So Lux Cannon is a 4 mana artifact that we can tap it to put a charge counter on it, and then we can also tap it to remove 3 charge counters from it to destroy target permanent. So the reason why we want to have this is we can get up to 2 counters, double them, make it 4, make it 8, and then we can just destroy something every turn. Darksteel Reactor is sort of a strange, unfair card. At the beginning of your upkeep, you put a charge counter on it. If you have 20 charge counters on it, you win the game instantly. So you can imagine how this can be very good with Vorel. I don't tend on using him as a win condition that often, but when I do, it's pretty funny. And then last is Eternity Vessel. This is a cool Vorel one. Really cheap card. It's great because it comes into play with a number of charge counters equal to your life total, and then you can use Vorel to double those charge counters, and then for the rest of the time that you have this out, whenever you play a land, your life total will become the number of charge counters that's on this. So if I play this during the time I have 30 life, and then I double it with Vorel, that becomes 60, and then I double that again, and it becomes 120, and then I play a forest on my turn, well then I'll have 120 life. And decks that try to win with just giant creatures, once you set this this habit of just making a bunch of life gain, it can be just backbreaking for your opponent. We also have 2 artifacts that you can use to make mana when you put counters on them. Everflowing Chalice. It costs 0 mana, and you pay 2 for its kicker cost. It comes into play with a charge counter for each charge. It comes into play. Oh no, actually, it doesn't use charge counters. No, it does use charge counters. What you do is it has multi-kicker, so it costs 2 mana for multi-kicker. You can. So if I pay 4 mana for it, then it'll come into play with 2 charge counters. It comes into play untapped, and you can tap it for 2 mana. So we can use this to double counters with Vorel and make a bunch of mana. Astral Cornucopia is about the same thing, except it costs XXX. So we have to pay 3 mana to get just 1 counter on it, but it's still very good, and it adds mana of any color, not just colorless mana. And then of course we have a Soul Ring, because we're playing Commander, and every Commander deck has a Soul Ring. We have a Simic Signet to help ramp our colors a little bit, to get blue mana and green mana when we need it. And then we have one of my favorite artifacts to run in Commander, Hedron Archive. It's colorless, you can run in any Commander deck. It's a 4-mana artifact, taps for 2 colorless mana. You can pay 2 mana and tap it and draw 2 cards. So it's great in every Commander deck, and I especially run it here. To go get some of these artifacts, we have Fabricate. This is just 3 mana, search your library for any artifact card, put it into your hand. Pretty standard stuff. And then we also have, for those cards that we just mentioned there, Trinket Mage can go and find an artifact with converted mana cost 1 or less. So it can get Soul Ring, it can get Astral Cornucopia, and it can get Everflowing Chalice if we want that. So, and then the only other tutors in the deck that I run is Primal Command, which can search for a creature, and Bring to Light, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The last couple cards in the deck is has to do with another win condition that we have. Give and Take is a split card. Is a split card that you can fuse both sides together. Give and Take is you can put 3+1/+1 counters on a creature, and you can remove all +1/+1 counters on a creature to draw that many cards. So we can remove 17 counters from a creature we control and draw 17 cards if we wanted to. Another standard thing is Blue Sun Zenith. We can make a bunch of mana in this deck and draw a bunch of cards. Rich Card's Expertise is a really amazing card. Not only do we get to draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures we control, but we get to cast a card with converted mana cost 5 or less from our hand for free. So what are we going to do with all these ways to draw cards? Well, say hello to one of our win conditions. Psychosis Crawler. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. Pretty good in this deck. So another thing that we can do is with this card that I mentioned before, Bioshift. Let me see if I can find it. So Bioshift is a card that I already showed you. You can move any number of +1/+1 counters from creatures you control to another creature. So what's great about this is if we already have a creature that has a bunch of counters on it, we can say move our counters onto Sage Devourers and draw a bunch of cards. Or we could move all of our counters onto Verdurous Gearhulk, or onto Fathom Mage and draw a bunch more cards. We can move a bunch of counters onto Triskelion and then just ping our opponent to death. So that's what this deck is really trying to do. It's a lot of fun to play. It's a great deck if you want to be competitive but also sort of stay out of other people's way. I tend to play Magic, or I tend to play Commander like how I play poker, which is you sort of want to let the other players just sort of kill each other while you staying in the wings, and while you're setting up your board you can be controlling with all your counter spells and just build these massive card presence, and eventually you'll win. And it's a lot of fun to do, and I hope you enjoyed this deck tech. We're going to be having a lot more coming in the future. My name is Joaqin. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.